Fox News alert: the massacre in Orlando raising more questions about homegrown terrorism right here in the United States. An ISIS-affiliated news agency claiming that Omar Mateen was a fighter for the Islamic State. Authorities say that that claim does not mean the gunman was acting on direct orders from the terror network. Tom Joscelyn joining me now. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a senior editor of the Long War Journal. Does it matter? ISIS-inspired, ISIS-directed. We seem to be getting bogged down in that.
Well, it doesn't matter from the victim's perspective.
Yeah.
That's of course what we have to keep in mind first and foremost. Where it matters is that this is the most successful of these supposed inspired attacks to date, basically. That is if it was just inspired. We don't know all the details yet. But if it was just an inspired attack, this is the most successful one of these where we have 50 dead people, dozens of more casualties. Usually these are not that lethal. To date, the professional terrorists have been more of a threat than the so-called inspired jihadis. But what it shows is that this inspired sort of homegrown threat that they call it is getting worse and worse.
And I'm wondering if it kind of minimizes things to refer to it as ISIS-inspired.
Well, you know,
I mean, does it really matter?
Well, the point there is that it's part of the same ideological movement. Right? So whether he had directions from Raqqa or not, this is a guy who was clearly part of that ideological movement and was adhering to that ideological movement. He was acting in their name, right? So the point is that that ideology has spread across the globe, and we have a bigger problem now than we've ever had since 9/11.
Now, you say that that 911 call that he made prior to going on that shooting spree was significant. Why is that a big deal?
It's exactly what ISIS tells their followers to do. They have a whole literature, a whole mythology built up about this idea that you have to pledge allegiance to the caliphate so you die in a state of obedience. If you die in a state of disobedience and you don't have a bay'ah, it's called, an oath of allegiance to the caliphate, then you risk going to hell. This is part of their mythology.
So you have to publicly state it, just like he did on 911.
Publicly stated, or
San Bernardino as well?
And San Bernardino attackers did it as well. This is part of their whole mythology, which is probably why he made the call in the first place.
You know, you write the Long War Journal. You're the editor of that. And I can't help but think about 15 years at war in Afghanistan, in Iraq. So many of our men and women have died to protect our country over there. George Bush had the theory of we'll fight them over there so we don't have to fight them here. And now terror comes to the most basic of cities in the United States.
You know, one of the things we say at the Long War Journal is that on 9/11, the jihadis were fighting in probably one country. Today we count about 18. You know, 9/11 wasn't just about us. It was about us, but it was also about sparking this political revolution. This was the idea that al-Qaeda had. They succeeded. That jihadi revolution has now swept across large expanses of the Muslim-majority world. And that's increased the risk to us from numerous different angles. And that's why it's called the Long War, because we're in a long war. And until we start fighting that generational battle against the ideas that motivate it and also the organizations that promulgate those ideas in a real comprehensive way, it's going to keep going.
And the next debate I think we have to have is what can each of us do as citizens to try to help out?
Right. I mean, you know, quite frankly, I'm sick of coming here and talking about terrorist attacks, you know. I only come on for the bad news, you know. But the point is that we have to address it in that generational sort of struggle. You know, what are we going to do to fight this in the long run to really turn it back?
We'll have you back again to talk about that, how we do it in the long run. Tom Joscelyn, thank you so much.
Thanks
Foundation for Defense of Democracies. John?